This is Virginia Underwood with Shaylin House Modern Press. Welcome to part 3 of the virtual book launch of the Peacemakers, a conversation with Bridget Striker, Boone County, Kentucky Library System, and author Rebecca Suter Lindsay. Enjoy.
And so I thought I would read a section from an early chapter. And in this, it just sort of shows you the difference. Swope is 10 and Manny is 14. And it's a Sunday afternoon, and they have been allowed off to go and play for a while before they have to do their evening chores. And what they do is they run across the pasture and they climb into a large oak tree, which they call the watching tree, because from there they can see both directions along the road that runs past their house. And so they're in the tree when we start this section. After a short rest, the boys scrambled into the tree and settled with their backs against the trunk. Manny wanted to make the most of the short time they had. Following Sunday dinner, they had been stuck in the stove room listening to Father read from the books on the reading table. Eventually, though, they were released to play until it was time for evening chores. Sunday or not, cows had to be milked and chickens fed. Manny reached into his shirt pocket and removed 2 ginger cakes. Want one, he offered. Swope eyed the 2 soft cookies with suspicion. Where'd you get them? Out of the cookie jar. Did you ask Aunt Jen? Aunt Jen wasn't around. Yes, she was. She was in the stove room in her rocking chair. Do you want one or not? Manny pressed. You'll ruin your supper, Swope reminded him. Not if you eat one. Swope reached out and took one of the ginger cakes. He took a small bite as if he wanted to first check and see if he would suffer harm from eating the pilfered treat. Manny stuffed the other one into his mouth all at once. For a minute, the 2 of them sat silently, enjoying the spicy flavor. Then Swope spoke abruptly. What's a unionist? A what? Manny mumbled, his mouth still full of cake. A unionist. Father was talking to Jacob Driver's father when he came to buy Crocs, and he said he was a unionist. Oh, you mean unionist. Manny cleared his mouth of ginger cake while he tried to think how to answer Swope. It means he's not sesh, he replied. Sesh? Swope struggled with this new word. What's sesh? Sesh are people who want Virginia to secede from the Union, from the United States. Secede? It means leaving the Union. Like South Carolina and Georgia did, they decided not to belong to the United States anymore, so they got out. They're making their own country. Forgetting, does Father want Virginia to secede? Of course not. He's a unionist. Forgetting that he had gained most of his understanding about secession from listening to Father talking with the other man, Manny felt pretty smug. Why would they do that? Swope asked, referring to the seceding states. What's wrong with staying in the United States? They think Lincoln is going to take their slaves away. Peace people don't have slaves, Swope commented. The Bible says it's wrong. He sat silent for a minute, his face screwed into a frown. Then he asked, so is Virginia going to get out of the United States and join the new country? He sounded distressed. No one knows, Manny answered. They're voting on it next week. Is Father voting? I suppose so. He usually votes. What if they vote for it? Then Virginia will leave the Union, Manny said matter-of-factly. Well, I think then Father will vote no. I hope he does. I don't want to be in another country. I like being in the United States. Father is just one person. He just gets one vote. He can't keep Virginia in the Union with just one vote. Well, there's Jacob's father. He said he was a unionist too. He'll vote against leaving. And Mother and Aunt Jen, uh, they're probably against secession. Mother and Aunt Jen are women. Women can't vote. Only men can vote. Outrage showed on Swope's face as he digested the reality of the injustice that had been going on right under his nose for all of his 10 years. Well, Davy's the uncle, Davy's a man, and so's grandfather. Grandfather can vote, but Davy can't. He's too young. You have to be 21 to vote. Manny was getting weary of answering Swope's questions. Every answer just seemed to bring up another question. Well, there's all the peace people, Swope continued, referring to the Mennonite community. At least the men, they should all vote to stay in the Union. And the Dunkards, they're peace people too. And the Quakers, Manny reminded him. Well, with all those people, I mean men, voting not to leave the Union, I don't see how Virginia can leave. Let's play wagons and buggies, Manny suggested, changing the subject. I'll take wagons, you can have the buggies.
Thank you for sharing that. Was there one character in the book that gave you trouble insofar as making him or her realistic or interesting or helping you move the plot forward? If so, how did you handle that?
Well, the hardest character that I had to write was Sam, who is the main slave character in the book. And Sam, when I started writing Sam into the book, I thought, you're just writing the same submissive, nice slave character that's been written into so many stories and movies. And, what, how can we write Sam? How could I write Sam so that we really see what his life was like and what he was thinking and doing? So I went to a good friend at my writers group, an African American friend, Leon Jones. I thought Leon could tell me what to do because he understood the Black community and I thought maybe some of the history. And he gave me an answer that surprised me. Um, he he said, I said, how can I write Sam? How should I write Sam? And he said, let Sam tell you. Listen to Sam and let him tell you who he is and how he behaves. And I did that. That was probably one piece of advice that I got, one of the most important pieces of advice that I got on writing in my whole life. Because when I started listening to Sam, he he became a much different character. Uh, he, I'm going to let you read the book and you'll see who Sam is. I I wanted to write the situation of the slaves in a more realistic manner than what's been written in the past. And I don't know if I succeeded at it or not. I tried. I did some research and I developed about two or three guiding principles. The first was in some of my research, begin to read that even though a slave might appear submissive, there were ways that they resisted and things that they did to, um, in a sense, get back at the oppression and the terrible system they lived under. So I took that into account. The other thing that I read that helped me was it said that when the men went off to war in the South, that left the women to control the slaves. And the women were not able to do that with the way the men did because the way the men did was with brutal punishment, with being whipping the slaves and all. So the slaves became more resistant. They began to leave the farms and the plantations in greater numbers. And one way that they got to safety, if a Northern Army came into a territory, a state, they could go to the Army and get some protection, and even go north when the Army withdrew. So I tried to put those ideas into the book um, as a way of writing a more accurate picture of what was happening then.
Well, and I think we were talking the other day that the uh, the role of African American resistance in the book is something we could have a whole nother discussion about at some
Right.
point in the future, um, because I enjoyed how you wove it into the story, but there's so much more to unpack just with that individual storyline that you have going on. Um, and moving into that, what are the central issues that arise in your story?
Well, I could sort of name them, but the way I want to explain them is as questions that Manny had to ask himself, uh, such as peacemaking. He has a real difficult time recognizing what leads to peace. So his actions sometimes don't lead to peace, and um, and that's because of his age. Hopefully, as he gets older, and hopefully I'll be able to get a sequel finished to this, and maybe a third one. Hopefully, as Manny gets older, he will learn more about peacemaking. Now, if you say a peacemaker is this way and only one way, then you have to understand that there are many ways of making peace. And I take up some of them in this book, and I have some. The second book, I want to look more at um, passive resistance or non-resistance, and the role that plays in making peace. So peacemaking is one. Justice. um, how can wrong be made right? And excuse me a minute. Manny has to look at situations and think things like bullying, and then the oppression that comes with slavery. He senses that things are not right and they're not fair, but he doesn't know what to do about them. But he does have a great sense of justice. Loyalty. He has to ask the question of himself: how can I protect my family in this situation? If hopefully we'll get to talking a little bit about the response of the Mennonite people and the Dunkards and Quakers to the conscription into the Confederate Army. And Mennonite men were accustomed to skipping what was called um, muster day. In other words, when the militias practiced, they just didn't go. And then they would give them pay a fine, 50 cents or 75 cents. Well, when we get to the Civil War, they can no longer do that. So Manny has a concern. How can I protect my father and my uncle from being conscripted into the Confederate Army? Honesty is a big issue for Manny. He doesn't like it when he lies, but yet he wants to protect his family. What's he supposed to do in that situation?
Thank you for watching part 3 of the virtual book launch of The Peacemakers. In part 4, Rebecca Suter Lindsay will read another selection from the book and will respond to questions that she received from participants during the virtual launch. Thank you.